The greatest mistake a king can make is believing silence means weakness. Those words drifted through the vaulted halls of Blackwood Castle long before anyone knew how deeply they would come to haunt the throne. Dawn poured pale silver light across towering stone walls as banners bearing the crest of the northern wolves stirred in the crisp mountain breeze. Every servant hurried through polished corridors. Every guard stood a little straighter, and every noble whispered the same rumor behind carefully rehearsed smiles. Their alpha king had married a human woman, not a she-wolf, not the daughter of a powerful alpha bloodline, not a celebrated Luna blessed by ancient prophecy. A human. Evelyn Carter stepped from the royal carriage with quiet grace, her ivory gown catching the early morning light while the hem brushed across smooth white marble. Her skin was fair, untouched by years of battle or harsh wilderness, and her calm blue eyes studied the unfamiliar castle without fear or excitement. She simply observed. That alone unsettled the wolves watching her. They expected trembling. They expected awe. Instead, they found stillness. The gathered nobles exchanged knowing smiles that carried more judgment than courtesy. Some lowered their voices, believing she could not hear them over the sound of trumpets announcing the royal procession. Others made no effort to hide their amusement at all. A human queen, one muttered. Another added that she would never survive the first winter in wolf territory. Someone quietly wondered how long it would take before the Alpha King regretted the treaty that had forced this marriage. Evelyn heard every word. She answered none of them. Her hands remained folded gently before her, as though the whispers belonged to someone else entirely. At the top of the grand staircase stood King Adrian Blackwood, the most feared alpha in the northern kingdoms. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wrapped in a dark ceremonial coat embroidered with silver thread, he carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone born to command. His silver-gray eyes met Evelyn's only briefly before returning to the ministers waiting beside him. This marriage had never been about romance. It had been negotiated after years of border disputes between human settlements and wolf territories. Peace demanded sacrifice, and today, both kingdoms believed they had found one. Adrian respected duty more than dreams. Evelyn represented duty, nothing more. As she approached, the royal advisor leaned closer to the king. She looks fragile. Adrian answered without changing expression. She only needs protection. The words were quiet, almost kind, yet they settled over Evelyn like a cloak she had never asked to wear. She neither smiled nor frowned. She simply climbed the remaining steps until she stood beside the Alpha King before hundreds of watching eyes. The High Elder began the ancient ceremony, speaking of honor, trust, and the future both kingdoms hoped to build together. Every promise echoed through the enormous hall beneath stained-glass windows that painted the polished floor in shades of blue and gold. Wolves bowed respectfully, as tradition required. Human diplomats watched with cautious optimism. Yet beneath the formal vows lived another conversation entirely, one spoken through glances, raised eyebrows, and doubtful expressions. They measured Evelyn with silent calculations. Too graceful to be dangerous. Too gentle to matter. Too human to understand wolves. Adrian noticed the unease spreading among his council. He understood why. His people valued strength above nearly everything else. They admired courage proven through hardship and respected warriors whose names carried stories into future generations. Evelyn possessed none of those things, at least not in their eyes. She appeared to be a quiet young woman stepping into a world far larger than herself. Adrian believed he understood exactly who his new bride was. He believed she would need his shield, his authority, and his kingdom simply to endure what lay ahead. When the ceremony ended, cheers rolled across the courtyard while bells echoed through the valley below. The marriage was complete. Servants opened the towering castle doors, inviting the new royal couple inside. Evelyn paused for only a heartbeat as cool air drifted through the entrance. Her fingertips brushed lightly against the ancient stone beside the doorway, almost as though greeting an old memory no one else could see. Then she continued forward without a word. High above the celebration, hidden behind a narrow balcony overlooking the castle grounds, an elderly woman wrapped in a weathered gray cloak watched the procession disappear into the palace. A faint smile touched her lips before she whispered to the empty air, "They see a bride. They never learn to recognize a storm before it arrives." Evelyn quickly discovered that the loudest sounds inside Blackwood Castle were never the royal trumpets or the footsteps of armored guards. They were the quiet conversations that stopped the instant she entered a room. Every hallway carried another carefully disguised judgment. Every elegant smile concealed another doubt, and every respectful bow seemed just a little too shallow to be sincere. She moved through the castle with calm dignity, greeting servants by name after only meeting them once, thanking cooks for every meal, and pausing whenever a young stable hand or frightened maid looked too nervous to speak. Her kindness puzzled everyone far more than confidence ever could. Wolves respected strength because strength demanded attention. Kindness, in their world, was often mistaken for surrender. The royal council noticed it first. During morning assemblies, while generals debated border patrols and ministers argued over trade routes, Evelyn remained quietly beside the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered valley. She never interrupted. She never offered opinions unless someone spoke directly to her. More than one council member concluded that the human queen simply did not understand matters of leadership. Lord Malcolm Ashford, the oldest advisor in the chamber, eventually leaned toward another noble and whispered, "She smiles too much for someone living among wolves." A few nearby chuckled softly. Evelyn heard every word without turning her head. Instead, she continued watching a flock of white birds circle above the pine forest below the cliffs. Their wings moved together with effortless rhythm before disappearing into distant clouds. Something about the sight made her smile even more gently. King Adrian observed these moments more often than anyone realized. From across the council chamber, he occasionally studied his bride between discussions, expecting frustration or embarrassment to eventually appear on her face. It never did. Even after hearing dismissive remarks, Evelyn carried herself with the same quiet composure. Adrian found that strangely admirable, although he interpreted it as innocence rather than resilience. He remained convinced that his responsibility was simple: protect her from court politics, protect her from rival kingdoms, protect her from a world built by wolves rather than humans. One afternoon, while touring the castle grounds, Adrian slowed his pace beside her. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable," he said in a steady voice, "tell Captain Rowan immediately. You should never face unnecessary trouble alone." Evelyn looked toward the towering mountains beyond the castle walls before answering. "Thank you for your concern." She spoke softly, almost thoughtfully. But not every battle begins with raised voices. Adrian glanced at her with mild curiosity. Before he could ask what she meant, she continued walking toward the royal gardens where winter roses somehow continued blooming beneath carefully tended glass roofs. He watched her disappear among rows of pale blossoms, wondering why such an ordinary sentence lingered in his thoughts longer than it should have. The days settled into a predictable rhythm. Every sunrise began with royal ceremonies, followed by meetings, diplomatic receptions, and evening banquets filled with polished manners hiding sharpened ambitions. Evelyn adapted without complaint. She listened far more than she spoke. She noticed details others ignored, remembering which servant limped after carrying heavy water buckets, which elderly gardener struggled to lift frozen branches, and which young messenger always skipped breakfast before beginning his rounds. Without announcing her intentions, she quietly solved problems one at a time. Fresh bread appeared beside the messenger before dawn. Warm gloves found their way into the gardener's tool shed. Extra help arrived for exhausted workers before anyone requested it. No speeches accompanied these gestures. No praise was expected. Yet people slowly began noticing that life around the castle somehow felt lighter whenever the queen passed through. Not everyone appreciated the change. Lady Cassandra Holloway, daughter of one of the most influential alpha families, watched Evelyn with growing irritation. She had spent years believing she would one day stand beside Adrian as queen. Now she saw a human occupying that place with nothing except quiet smiles and endless patience. During an afternoon gathering in the Grand Gallery, Cassandra deliberately approached Evelyn before dozens of watching nobles. "Your Majesty," she said sweetly, "does castle life frighten you? It must be difficult living among people so much stronger than yourself." The room grew noticeably quieter. Several nobles turned discreetly toward the exchange. Evelyn met Cassandra's confident gaze without the slightest sign of offense. "Strength wears many faces," she answered gently. Sometimes the loudest one is not the strongest. Cassandra laughed politely as though dismissing the remark, but something in Evelyn's calm expression unsettled her in ways she could not explain. From across the gallery, Adrian witnessed the conversation from beginning to end. He believed Evelyn had simply answered with unexpected grace. What he did not notice was the brief silence that followed, as though even the ancient stone walls themselves had paused to listen. Hidden behind that same silence rested a truth no one in Blackwood Castle had yet begun to understand, and Evelyn intended to keep it that way for as long as destiny allowed. Winter settled over the northern kingdom with a silence that felt almost sacred, yet beneath the blanket of fresh snow the land trembled with unease. Messengers rode through the mountain passes day and night, their horses exhausted, their cloaks heavy with ice, each carrying reports that grew darker with every sunrise. Villages near the eastern border had begun emptying before sunset. Merchants canceled caravans that had traveled the same roads for generations. Even the wolves guarding the outer watchtowers no longer laughed during the long night shifts. Something was changing beyond the mountains, and everyone could feel it long before anyone dared to speak its name aloud. Evelyn noticed the change first in the castle servants. The cheerful conversations that once filled the kitchens faded into whispers. Stable hands checked saddles twice before dawn. Armorers worked deep into the night, repairing shields and polishing ceremonial blades that had not left their racks in years. No one explained any of it to her, but she quietly understood that preparation always arrived before fear admitted its own existence. During the next royal council meeting, the great chamber carried a tension unlike any she had witnessed since arriving at Blackwood Castle. Maps covered the massive oak table while commanders argued over supply routes, mountain crossings, and border patrols. Adrian listened without interruption, his expression calm, though the faint lines around his silver eyes revealed the weight he carried. Finally, the heavy doors opened once more as a scout covered in frost stepped inside. Every conversation stopped. The young wolf knelt before the throne, struggling to steady his breathing after riding nearly 200 miles without rest. "Your Majesty," he said, lowering his head, "King Victor Ashthorne has united the Eastern Pax beneath his banner." A heavy silence settled over the chamber. Several council members exchanged anxious glances, while others quietly cursed beneath their breath. Victor Ashthorne was known throughout the kingdoms as an alpha who believed peace existed only until someone strong enough decided otherwise. He had expanded his territory year after year through intimidation, relentless negotiations, and carefully planned displays of power. Adrian folded his hands before him. "What does he want?" The scout hesitated. "He has sent an official declaration." A sealed parchment was placed upon the council table. Lord Malcolm broke the crimson wax and slowly unfolded the message. His face lost all color before he even reached the final lines. "Read it," Adrian ordered. Malcolm swallowed carefully. "King Victor challenges the Northern Crown to a royal duel before the assembled kingdoms. The victor shall claim unquestioned leadership over every allied wolf territory." Quiet gasps echoed around the room. Royal duels were ancient traditions meant to prevent endless wars. Entire kingdoms accepted their outcome because honor demanded it. Adrian remained composed, but everyone understood what was truly at stake. This was no ordinary challenge. Malcolm continued reading. His voice grew even quieter. "There is one additional condition." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Continue." Malcolm lowered the parchment for a brief moment, as though hoping the words might somehow change. "If the Northern Crown refuses, or if Victor prevails, Queen Evelyn Carter will be surrendered into Victor's royal household as part of the treaty between kingdoms." The chamber erupted with outrage. Commanders slammed gloved hands against the table, while nobles protested that no queen should ever become part of diplomatic terms. Adrian rose from his throne so suddenly that every voice immediately disappeared. His gaze remained fixed upon the parchment, yet something colder than anger settled across his face. Evelyn stood near the tall windows exactly where she always did during council meetings. She neither gasped nor stepped backward. Instead, she quietly watched snowflakes drifting beyond the glass while everyone else argued around her. Adrian finally turned toward her. "You need not concern yourself with this," he said firmly. "This is my responsibility." Evelyn slowly met his eyes. There was no fear in her expression, only thoughtful calm. "Responsibilities have a way of reaching everyone eventually," she answered. Adrian interpreted her words as quiet courage from someone trying to remain composed despite impossible circumstances. He walked toward her with steady confidence. "I gave you my promise when we married. No one will ever take you from this kingdom." Evelyn held his gaze for a long moment before offering the faintest smile. "I believe you intend to keep that promise." Her answer sounded sincere, yet something about it lingered in Adrian's thoughts after the meeting ended. It was almost as though she had not spoken about his strength at all, but about something neither of them had yet chosen to reveal. High above the council chamber, hidden once again within the castle's oldest tower, the mysterious gray-cloaked woman watched the royal banners flutter against the frozen sky. She quietly closed her eyes and whispered into the mountain wind. "The first move has been made. Now destiny will begin asking questions that only the silent already know how to answer." The announcement spread across the kingdom faster than the winter wind racing through the mountain passes. Within 2 days, every village, every watchtower, and every distant settlement knew that the royal duel would take place beneath the ancient Stone Crown Arena, where generations of alpha rulers had settled disputes that shaped history. Merchants stopped discussing trade and began discussing odds. Travelers altered their routes simply to witness the gathering of kings. Even the oldest wolves admitted they had never seen tensions rise so quickly without a single sword being raised. Blackwood Castle transformed almost overnight. Courtyards once filled with musicians now echoed with disciplined training. Messengers arrived from allied packs carrying banners, supplies, and solemn promises of loyalty. The royal blacksmiths worked until long after midnight, repairing ceremonial armor polished bright enough to reflect the winter sun. Adrian accepted every report with steady confidence, refusing to let his people see the burden pressing against his shoulders. Yet when he stood alone upon the western balcony each evening, his gaze remained fixed on the distant eastern mountains where Victor Ashthorne waited beyond the frozen horizon. Evelyn often found him there after sunset. She never interrupted his silence. Instead, she stood beside him, wrapped in a deep blue cloak as snow drifted quietly across the castle walls. One evening, Adrian finally spoke, without taking his eyes from the horizon. "I never imagined our marriage would become part of another king's ambition." Evelyn looked toward the same mountains. "People who seek power often mistake kindness for an invitation." Adrian nodded slowly. "Victor believes threatening you will weaken my judgment." She answered with remarkable calm. "Then he already misunderstands both of us." Adrian glanced toward her, surprised by the quiet certainty in her voice. Before he could respond, the castle bells rang below, announcing the arrival of more allied leaders. Duty called them away once again. Evelyn remained on the balcony for another moment, watching the fading light disappear behind endless white peaks. Her expression remained peaceful, but deep inside memories stirred that she had spent years carefully locking away. Before dawn the following morning, she quietly left the royal residence alone. No guards followed because she requested none. Her footsteps carried her through sleeping gardens until she reached the oldest chapel inside the castle grounds, a small stone sanctuary almost forgotten by everyone except the elderly caretaker who tended its candles. The caretaker smiled warmly when she entered. "You are awake early, Your Majesty." Evelyn returned the smile. "Some answers only visit before sunrise." The old woman nodded as though she understood far more than she admitted. Evelyn walked toward a weathered wooden bench near a narrow stained glass window where pale morning light spilled across the floor. She closed her eyes, allowing the silence to settle around her. For the first time since arriving in the kingdom, fragments of another life returned with startling clarity. A quiet training yard hidden among towering cedar trees. The sound of wooden practice blades meeting in perfect rhythm. A patient voice repeating the same lesson over and over. A weapon is never the source of strength. The heart deciding when not to use it always comes first. Evelyn opened her eyes. Her fingertips rested gently against the smooth wooden bench, almost remembering movements they had not performed for years. She drew a slow breath before standing once again. Outside the chapel, the first rays of sunlight painted the castle towers in soft gold. As she crossed the courtyard, she noticed several young wolf pups struggling to lift heavy buckets for the morning kitchens. Without hesitation, she walked over and quietly helped them carry the load. The children thanked her with bright smiles, unaware that members of the royal court had been watching from a nearby balcony. Lady Cassandra folded her arms with open disbelief. She spends her mornings carrying water, she scoffed. That is hardly the behavior of a queen. Lord Malcolm remained unusually thoughtful. Perhaps, he replied carefully, or perhaps we have spent so much time measuring strength that we no longer recognize discipline when it stands before us. Cassandra dismissed the thought with a wave of her hand. Across the courtyard, Adrian witnessed Evelyn laughing softly with the children before sending them back toward the kitchens. Something about the scene eased the weight pressing upon his mind, even if only for a moment. He still believed his greatest duty was to protect his gentle bride from the storm approaching their kingdom. He never imagined that while he prepared to defend her future, she was quietly preparing herself to face a destiny she had recognized long before any messenger crossed the eastern border. 8 mornings remained before the royal duel, and with every passing sunrise the kingdom seemed to breathe a little more slowly, as though the mountains themselves were waiting for a single decision that would reshape generations. Across Blackwood Castle, preparations continued without pause. Soldiers practiced disciplined formations across the frozen training grounds, while royal craftsmen reinforced ceremonial armor that had belonged to Alpha Kings long before Adrian's reign. Nobles spoke confidently whenever the king entered a room, yet the instant he departed their certainty dissolved into anxious whispers. They trusted Adrian's courage, but Victor Ashthorne had built his reputation defeating opponents who believed determination alone could overcome experience. Adrian refused to allow doubt to spread through his people. Every afternoon he trained before the commanders, demonstrating flawless discipline rather than reckless aggression. Every evening he met with neighboring leaders, strengthening alliances that might preserve peace regardless of the duel's outcome. He carried the weight of an entire kingdom with quiet dignity, but each night exhaustion settled a little deeper behind his silver eyes. Evelyn noticed what others overlooked. His meals often returned untouched. The maps in his private study accumulated fresh markings long after midnight. More than once she found him standing beside the fireplace without realizing the flames had nearly burned away. She never interrupted those moments with questions. Instead, she left warm tea upon the table, straightened scattered documents after he had fallen asleep in his chair, and quietly slipped away before dawn. Adrian believed those small acts came from compassion. He never imagined they also came from careful observation. One afternoon, the royal physician requested an audience after Adrian completed another demanding training session. The physician bowed respectfully before speaking. "Your Majesty, your strength remains exceptional, but fatigue cannot be ignored forever. Even the strongest wolf must recover before carrying another burden." Adrian smiled politely. "The kingdom cannot pause because I am tired." "No," the physician replied gently. "But neither can a kingdom stand if its king forgets he is still mortal." Evelyn happened to pass outside the chamber as the conversation ended. She caught only a few quiet words, yet they were enough to deepen the concern already growing inside her. Later that evening, she wandered through the nearly empty royal library, where shelves filled with weathered histories reached almost to the vaulted ceiling. She selected no books. Instead, she stood before an ancient tapestry depicting rulers from centuries past. Every king held a weapon. Every queen held either a crown or a child. Evelyn studied the woven figures for a long time before softly asking the empty room, "Did anyone ever think to give the queen a choice?" A familiar voice answered from the shadows. Very few ever asked. The elderly woman in the gray cloak stepped quietly into the candlelight, her weathered face carrying the same peaceful expression Evelyn had seen only once before. "I wondered when you would come," Evelyn said calmly. "No," the old woman replied with a faint smile. "You knew?" Evelyn lowered her eyes. "He still believes I need saving. Because he has lived his entire life believing protection is the greatest gift strength can offer." The old woman moved beside the tapestry. "He has never imagined strength wearing your face." Evelyn remained silent. "Do you regret hiding who you are?" the woman asked. A long pause followed. "Regret is not the right word," Evelyn answered. "Promises sometimes require silence." The old woman nodded knowingly. "And silence always has an ending." Before Evelyn could ask another question, the chapel bell echoed across the castle grounds. When she turned toward the sound and looked back again, the woman had already disappeared into the maze of stone corridors, leaving only the faint scent of cedar lingering in the still air. That same night, another messenger arrived from the eastern frontier. This one carried no threat, only a formal invitation bearing Victor Ashtorn's royal seal. The duel would begin precisely at sunrise 7 days later before witnesses from every allied kingdom. Tradition required both rulers to attend with their royal households. Lord Malcolm carefully folded the parchment after reading it aloud. The room remained silent until Adrian finally spoke. "We leave in 5 days." His commanders immediately began discussing travel arrangements, escort formations, and security plans. Evelyn quietly watched the fire dancing inside the great stone hearth. In its shifting glow, she no longer saw flames. She saw weathered cedar trees, worn practice grounds, patient lessons repeated through countless seasons, and a promise made long ago beneath another winter sky. She slowly closed her eyes, drawing one careful breath. The time for silence was growing shorter than anyone inside Blackwood Castle had yet begun to understand. The morning of departure arrived beneath a sky the color of polished steel. Frost covered every stone along the castle courtyard, turning the familiar paths into ribbons of silver beneath the first light of dawn. Blackwood Castle awakened long before sunrise. Horses stamped against the frozen ground while banners bearing the crest of the northern wolves fluttered in the sharp mountain wind. Every member of the royal escort understood that this journey would become part of history, although none could guess how history intended to remember it. King Adrian Blackwood mounted his horse with the calm confidence expected of an alpha ruler. His polished armor reflected the pale morning light, and the ancient cloak of his bloodline rested across his shoulders like the weight of generations before him. Around him, commanders issued quiet orders while scouts moved ahead to secure the mountain roads leading towards Stone Crown Arena. Evelyn emerged from the castle a few moments later wearing a deep blue traveling cloak fastened with a simple silver clasp. She carried no jewels beyond her wedding ring and wore none of the elaborate ornaments expected of a queen attending such an important ceremony. Several nobles exchanged puzzled glances, quietly interpreting her simplicity as nervousness. Adrian stepped beside her and offered his arm. "The journey will be cold," he said gently. "Stay close to the escort once we reach the mountain pass." Evelyn accepted his arm with a grateful smile. "I will stay where I am needed." He interpreted the answer as reassurance and nodded without questioning it further. The procession crossed frozen valleys, climbed narrow roads carved into towering cliffs, and passed villages whose people gathered quietly along the roadside. Families bowed respectfully as their king rode past, while children waved small banners stitched with the colors of the Northern Kingdom. Evelyn returned every greeting with the same warm smile she had offered the castle servants, never allowing the growing tension around her to change her gentle manner. As the hours passed, the ancient silhouette of Stone Crown Arena slowly emerged from the mountains. Massive pillars surrounded the circular field, each carved from granite older than any living kingdom. Flags representing every allied territory circled the arena, dancing against the winter sky. Thousands of spectators had already filled the stone terraces, their conversations blending into a low, steady murmur that echoed across the valley. Adrian studied the enormous gathering in silence. "Every ruler in the north has come," Lord Malcolm observed quietly. "No matter what happens today, every kingdom will remember it." Adrian nodded once. "Then we will give them a reason to remember honor." Across the arena, another royal procession appeared beneath crimson banners. King Victor Ashthorn rode at its head with unmistakable confidence, surrounded by loyal commanders whose polished armor reflected the afternoon sun. He dismounted with measured composure before approaching the center platform where the ancient judges waited. His gaze swept across the northern delegation before finally settling upon Evelyn. A faint smile appeared that carried more certainty than courtesy. Adrian immediately stepped forward, placing himself naturally between Victor and his queen. Victor inclined his head in a gesture that appeared respectful on the surface. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, "you have traveled far." Adrian answered with equal restraint. "As have you." Victor allowed a brief silence before speaking again. "History rarely remembers cautious kings. It remembers decisive ones." Adrian met his eyes without hesitation. History also remembers those who mistake confidence for victory. The surrounding nobles listened without breathing, sensing that every sentence carried meaning beyond simple diplomacy. Evelyn remained only a few steps behind Adrian, watching both kings with quiet attention. Her expression revealed neither fear nor excitement. Instead, she observed the arena itself, the distance between the stone markers, the shifting mountain wind, the position of the afternoon sun, and the ancient symbols carved into the weathered granite beneath their feet. They were details few others noticed, yet she seemed to recognize each one with surprising familiarity. From high among the oldest spectator terraces, the gray-cloaked woman quietly watched the gathering unfold. A peaceful smile touched her weathered face as the winter breeze carried distant echoes across the arena. "The lesson is ending," she whispered softly. "The truth is almost ready to introduce itself." Early the next morning, the bells of Stone Crown Arena echoed across the frozen valley, their deep voices rolling through the mountains like distant thunder. Thousands of spectators filled the ancient terraces until every seat overlooked the weathered circle where kings had settled the fate of kingdoms for centuries. Snow rested lightly upon the stone walls, sparkling beneath a clear winter sky, while the banners of every allied territory swayed in the cold breeze. Evelyn stood quietly beside Adrian beneath the royal pavilion, watching servants prepare the ceremonial platform with calm attention. Around her, commanders adjusted polished armor, nobles whispered predictions, and visiting rulers exchanged guarded smiles. Every conversation eventually circled back to the same belief. The Northern King would protect his gentle human queen. No one imagined she might be carrying a burden of her own. Adrian noticed Evelyn studying the arena instead of the gathering crowd. "You have been unusually quiet," he said softly. She turned toward him with the same peaceful expression she had worn since the day they first met. "There is a difference between silence and uncertainty." He smiled faintly, believing she was encouraging him. "You always seem calmer than everyone else." Evelyn looked toward the ancient stone circle once more. Sometimes calm comes from accepting what cannot be avoided. Before Adrian could answer, the royal herald stepped into the center of the arena and announced the beginning of the formal proceedings. Every conversation immediately faded. Representatives from each kingdom approached the ancient altar one by one, placing ceremonial seals upon a carved granite table that symbolized their agreement to honor the outcome of the duel. Tradition demanded fairness, discipline, and restraint above all else. It was never intended to celebrate destruction. It existed so entire kingdoms would not be forced into endless war. As the final seal was placed upon the altar, King Victor Ashthorn entered the arena wearing dark ceremonial armor trimmed with crimson. His confident stride drew the attention of every spectator. He greeted the assembled rulers with polished courtesy before allowing his gaze to settle upon Adrian. "I trust you rested well," Victor said with a composed smile. Adrian answered evenly. "A clear conscience allows peaceful sleep." Victor's smile widened almost imperceptibly. "Then today will test more than strength." Adrian remained calm. "It always does." The exchange ended without raised voices, yet the tension between the two rulers seemed to ripple across the silent arena. Evelyn watched both men carefully. Something in Victor's eyes reminded her of lessons learned many years before. Not lessons about fighting, but about ambition. She remembered the quiet voice of her old teacher beneath towering cedar trees. "Never fear the opponent who speaks loudly. Watch the one who believes victory already belongs to him." The memory lingered as she observed Victor greeting visiting nobles with effortless confidence. Nearby, Lady Cassandra quietly approached several royal guests. "Our queen has never even held a training blade," she whispered with misplaced certainty. "She has lived among us for weeks and has never stepped into the practice yard." The nobles nodded politely, accepting the statement without question. They had seen only kindness, patience, and quiet grace. None of them had noticed how Evelyn's eyes instinctively measured distance whenever she entered a room, how she observed every doorway, every staircase, every shifting breeze, or how her footsteps remained balanced even across frozen stone. Those habits had become so natural that she no longer realized anyone could mistake them for ordinary manners. Lord Malcolm, standing several feet away, watched Evelyn with thoughtful curiosity. The more he observed the young queen, the less certain he became that anyone truly understood her. There was no fear in the way she carried herself, no restless movement, no anxious glance toward the arena. Instead, she appeared almost familiar with the place, as though the ancient traditions surrounding the duel belonged to memories she had never shared. High above the arena, the gray-cloaked woman remained hidden among weathered columns overlooking the gathering below. She folded her hands together and quietly smiled. "They have mistaken humility for helplessness," she whispered to the winter wind. "That has always been the easiest mistake to make." A trumpet sounded across the valley, announcing that the ceremonial hour had arrived. The judges rose together while every ruler stood in respectful silence. Adrian stepped forward toward the ancient stone circle prepared to carry the hopes of his kingdom. Evelyn watched him go with quiet admiration, but for the first time since entering Blackwood Castle, a subtle change appeared in her expression. The peaceful smile remained, yet beneath it rested unwavering resolve. Deep within her heart, she recognized that the promise she had protected through years of silence was approaching the moment when silence would no longer be enough. The ancient bronze horn sounded once, its deep voice rolling across Stone Crown Arena until even the restless mountain wind seemed to pause. Every conversation vanished. Thousands of eyes turned toward the weathered circle of white stone where the judges of the allied kingdoms slowly took their places beneath towering banners that represented generations of honor. The oldest judge stepped forward carrying the ceremonial staff that had opened every royal duel for more than 300 years. His voice echoed clearly through the valley. "Today, two kings stand before history. Let wisdom guide strength, and let honor guide victory." Adrian walked into the center of the arena with steady confidence, every measured step reflecting the discipline that had earned the loyalty of the Northern Kingdom. Across from him, Victor Ashthorne entered with equal composure, wearing the unmistakable smile of a ruler convinced destiny had already chosen its favorite. The judges reviewed the ancient rules one final time. The contest would continue until one ruler could no longer continue under the judgment of the council. No army would interfere. No kingdom would break the decision once declared. It was a tradition created to spare countless families from the suffering of endless war. As the formal ceremony concluded, Adrian and Victor exchanged respectful bows before the contest began. The arena fell so quiet that the fluttering banners above seemed louder than the thousands gathered below. Evelyn remained beside the royal pavilion, her blue eyes following every movement with remarkable calm. She did not watch like a frightened queen hoping for rescue. She watched like someone carefully reading a story whose ending had not yet arrived. The opening exchanges revealed why both rulers had earned the respect of their kingdoms. Adrian moved with disciplined precision, never wasting motion, never allowing emotion to cloud his judgment. Victor answered with remarkable confidence, adapting quickly and forcing every decision to become more difficult than the one before. The judges observed closely while nobles whispered uncertain predictions beneath their breath. Minutes passed. The winter sun climbed higher above the arena. What had begun as quiet confidence slowly became visible concern among the northern delegation. Victor's preparation had been far more thorough than anyone expected. Adrian remained composed, yet every careful adjustment demanded greater effort than the last. Lord Malcolm quietly lowered his head. Captain Rowan folded his arms tighter across his chest. Even Lady Cassandra's confident expression began to fade as she realized the outcome was no longer certain. Adrian refused to surrender even a single moment of determination. He met every challenge with unwavering resolve, carrying not only his own honor but the hopes of every citizen who believed in his leadership. Yet Evelyn noticed something almost no one else recognized. His breathing had become slightly heavier than before. The long weeks of preparation, endless meetings, sleepless nights, and relentless responsibility had quietly taken their toll. He had never allowed anyone to see it because protecting others had always come before protecting himself. A quiet sadness touched Evelyn's heart, not because she doubted him, but because she finally understood the loneliness that came with wearing a crown. Victor recognized the same change. His confidence grew noticeably stronger as he addressed Adrian from across the stone circle. "You carry too many burdens, Northern King," he called calmly. "Even the strongest shoulders eventually grow tired." Adrian answered without hesitation. Some burdens are worth carrying. Applause echoed from the northern terraces, but beneath the encouragement, Evelyn saw the truth becoming impossible to ignore. Adrian's determination remained unshaken, yet the balance of the contest had begun to shift. The judges exchanged careful glances while several visiting rulers quietly leaned forward in their seats. The gray-cloaked woman high above the arena slowly closed her eyes. "The heart has carried the kingdom as far as it can," she whispered into the winter air. "Now another promise must awaken." Evelyn drew one slow breath. Memories she had guarded for years settled peacefully into place. The cedar forest, the patient teacher, the forgotten oath. The countless mornings spent learning discipline before sunrise while the world believed she possessed nothing beyond kindness. She looked once more toward Adrian, whose gaze never left his opponent despite the growing weight upon his shoulders. In that single moment, she realized the promise she had made long ago was no longer about protecting a secret. It had become about protecting the man who had spent every day believing it was his duty to protect her. Quietly, without seeking attention, without asking permission, Evelyn took one measured step away from the royal pavilion, and although almost no one noticed the movement, destiny certainly did. Evelyn's single step onto the ancient stone circle seemed almost too quiet to matter, yet every conversation across Stone Crown Arena disappeared before her second step touched the ground. Thousands of eyes followed the young queen as she crossed the weathered granite with unhurried confidence, her blue cloak moving gently in the winter breeze. Adrian immediately turned toward her, surprise breaking through the calm discipline he had carried since sunrise. "Evelyn," he said softly, "this is not your burden." She met his gaze with the same peaceful smile that had greeted servants, children, and strangers since the day she entered Blackwood Castle. "It became mine the moment I accepted your hand," she replied. The oldest judge lifted his ceremonial staff. "Your Majesty, only those recognized under the ancient laws may request to stand before this council." Evelyn reached into the fold of her cloak and carefully removed a small silver medallion worn smooth by many years. Its surface carried the forgotten crest of the Moon Sanctuary, an order older than every kingdom gathered inside the arena. A quiet murmur spread through the terraces. Lord Malcolm's eyes widened with recognition. "That seal cannot be real," one visiting noble whispered. The gray-cloaked woman finally descended from the highest terrace, her steady footsteps echoing across the silent arena. Every judge immediately bowed their heads in respectful acknowledgement. "High Keeper Eleanor," the eldest judge said with visible reverence, "you honor us with your presence." Eleanor inclined her head before turning toward Evelyn. "For many years she honored a promise that required silence," the old woman said. "Today I release her from that promise." No one moved. No one spoke. Eleanor continued, her voice carrying clearly through the crisp mountain air. "Evelyn Carter was never raised to seek power. She was raised to prevent those who seek power from destroying others. She trained where pride could not follow. She learned discipline before ambition. She mastered restraint before skill. She chose an ordinary life because peace mattered more than recognition." Adrian stared at his wife as though meeting her for the first time. Memories suddenly rearranged themselves inside his mind. The balanced footsteps, the careful observations, the calm beneath pressure, the quiet confidence hidden beneath kindness. None of it had ever been weakness. It had been extraordinary discipline wrapped in humility. Victor Ashthorne studied Evelyn with a thoughtful expression that had finally replaced certainty. "You concealed yourself well," he admitted. Evelyn answered gently, "I never concealed who I was. People simply decided who I must be before asking." The judges quietly consulted the ancient records preserved beneath the arena. After several long moments, the eldest judge raised the ceremonial staff once more. "By the oldest covenant of the Allied Kingdoms, a sworn guardian of the Moon Sanctuary possesses the right to stand in defense of a royal house when recognized by its High Keeper." A wave of astonishment swept through the gathered rulers. Adrian stepped toward Evelyn, his voice quieter than ever before. "Why did you never tell me?" She looked into his silver eyes with genuine warmth. "Because I wanted you to know me before you admired me. I wanted kindness to be enough." For a long moment Adrian could not answer. Then, in full view of every kingdom gathered beneath the winter sky, The Alpha King slowly lowered himself onto one knee before his queen. No tradition required it. No judge requested it. He bowed because respect had become greater than pride. "Forgive me," he said sincerely. "I believe my greatest duty was protecting you. I never realized the strength standing beside me." Evelyn gently offered him her hand, and Adrian rose with a quiet smile unlike any his people had ever seen. The judges formally declared that the challenge would proceed under the ancient covenant, with its outcome determined according to the laws of honor that protected every kingdom from needless conflict. More important than any ruling, however, was what had already changed. The rulers gathered inside Stone Crown Arena no longer measured greatness by appearance, bloodline, or reputation alone. They had witnessed humility reveal a deeper kind of strength. As the winter sun broke through the clouds, golden light spilled across the ancient stones, the royal banners, and the joined hands of a king and queen who now faced the future as true equals. Far beyond the northern peaks, hidden beneath distant forests where no kingdom yet claimed authority, another pair of watchful eyes quietly observed the changing light. A calm voice carried into the wind with the promise of journeys still waiting to begin. The age of forgotten strength has awakened. Now the world will have to decide whether it is ready to meet it